Good morning, everybody. How are we doing today? It is a Tuesday after the long weekend here in America for Memorial Day, where we celebrate the young men who were cut down defending the economic freedoms of the rich. It's been a long time since we fought for freedom in the true sense of that word. Uh, I don't want to go down that road right now. But first of all, I want to correct a mistake on my episode I made about the Blue Note guys, beginner Blue Note. Uh, I somehow omitted. Oh shit, man! I omitted Lou Donaldson. He was on all my preliminary lists, but I kind of kept shuffling him and jostling him around to make four nice dozen, and somehow he got left off the final thing. And he's absolutely one of the great Blue Note artists, and should have been on that episode without question. I'm the biggest Lou fan. I couldn't believe that I somehow didn't get him in there, but it happens. But we love Lou, and I talked about Lou quite a lot, so we're not going to stress about that too much. We got some nice flimsy vinyl in terms of the jacket. It's United Artists, Japanese pressing of Zoot Sims. And Zoot's a wonderful tenor player. For those of you who aren't too familiar with Zoot, he's a really diverse player that can sit in a lot of settings. Who his body of work is pretty expansive. Even in the 50s and 60s, there's a lot of stuff. He plays a lot of the greats from Al Cohn, that whole kind of scene. And truthfully, most of the White Cats played with other White Cats throughout the scene, and that was just kind of how that went. We went boating yesterday for Memorial Day on the Mississippi River by a town called Winona, mid-sized college town, maybe 40,000 people. The river's really high from all the spring rains, and it's still real past its normal high stage. And so it was a little disconcerting, honestly, because the water, you could just see the current. It was carrying big trees in it. And there's a shipping channel which you gotta kind of stay in boating wise. And so it was all fine, but got some sun, which always feels nice to be out and hanging out with the American beer drinking crowd. I've been sober for a couple years, and I've enjoyed alcohol most of my life, but there's a certain demographic in this country that pounds beers like it's a part of patriotism, I think, which is always a little confusing to me, but it was a fun time, though, and it was nice getting some sun, and I was out there with my wife and my brothers and my mom, so it's a good time. So, apologies to Lou Donaldson. He should have been part of that last episode without question, and how he ended up, like I say, it was on all my preliminary lists, but I kept shuffling him and juking him and jiving him, and somehow he got left off, which is a real shame. I had to really correct that today. So next I want to talk about my next order of Japanese records I just received. I got them actually last week, but I had stuff going on. Haven't listened to very much of it yet, and I had an episode I wanted to already kind of make, and so here we are talking about them today. There's a few main themes of this batch of stuff, and those themes would mostly be Lester Young and Mode records from the West Coast, who I have all the early titles, but I was missing some of the later titles. And a lot of the stuff was popping up again from Face Records out of Tokyo, and I got a lot of great stuff. 15 records. I think it was like $130 plus shipping. Wasn't bad at all. This Zoot Sims, as I showed you, was, I think I got this for $1, maybe $2. The vinyl sounds beautiful. Sounds great, in spite of that flimsy cover. It's one of the last records on this United Artists 14,000 series I didn't have. So it's a nice little fill in the gap right there for a great price. So we're going to look first at Lester Young, I guess. Lester's one of the greats of this music. And he's one of the most expressive, storytelling. Come on, sit on Grandpa's knee while I tell you and recount the stories of our people in our childhood and the upbringing of our nation. Lester's just a character. He nicknamed a lot of people It just wasn't. He wasn't like he sat there and thought about nicknames. They just kind of rolled off his tongue. And once Lester called you something, everybody else called you that. That's who you were. Bottom line, Lester Young didn't throw nicknames around for fun. He coined you, and you were minted. You could spend that cash. That was just the way it was going to be. Lady Day, I believe, was coined by Lester Young, if I remember. But he definitely gave a lot of nicknames out. My friend Jean-Michel, he knew a lot of the people that he named, including Sweets Edison and Ray Brown. So he's told me a lot of these stories about Lester. And we were talking the other day about Lester, and he asked me if I had some of the early work that was kind of essential by him, including stuff from Keystone and Atlantic label, not Atlantic, Keystone and Aladdin labels. And I had to admit I didn't have them. Neither of them are labels I've collected, or I don't think either of them were even LP era labels, which always makes them more challenging to find and collect. I have seen the Aladdin stuff a couple times on 10-inch over the years. They always kind of go for pretty good money. And I didn't know how important they were. I thought most of his best work was at Verve. But John Michel's like, he's a really fiery player on some of these Aladdin and Keystone sets. So I found, first of all, this has been reissued by Mercury. And Mercury, of course, owns MRC. Got an interesting kind of shellac-y cover. It's kind of cool. Lester Young Quartet of the Kansas City 7. And it's hard to read on there, honestly, but Lester Young, Slam Stewart, Buck Clayton, Count Basie, Rodney Richardson maybe, Dickie Wells, Sid Catlett, Johnny Guarnieri, Joe Jones. So a lot of Basie guys, of course. And this is stuff Prez on Keynote, not Keystone, Keynote. Thinking this is probably from late 40s, maybe early 50s. And again, he's at Savoy as well, which I have a lot of the Savoy material. So I thought between Savoy and Verve, I had most of Lester's stuff, but I haven't listened to it yet, to be honest. And again, this is only, I got $2 I paid for that. So it'll be a great way for me to dig into his Keynote recordings. And then these are records, like I said, I've seen these two over the years, more so as these reissues, which I got, but I have seen the 10 inches a few times. And these are from Aladdin. And Aladdin's a label I'm kind of learning about as we speak. And the process never stops. Everyone's like, this dude knows everything about labels. I'm constantly learning about labels, and I'm often sharing the stuff within days of me kind of learning it and figuring it out. It's amazing how much I'm still learning, how much I'm still figuring out, how expansive and broad the jazz universe is. It's a pretty endless thing. And my expertise, as is known, is limited to really 45 post-war to 1970. Once you get past 70, I don't really have a lot at stake. I don't really talk about it a lot because I don't consider myself knowledgeable enough to have an opinion or to even share about it. I can talk CTI, I can talk the funk, fusion, R&B stuff, but there's a lot of stuff post-70 that I just have no interest in, from the awful album covers to the free noise squonking jazz. I just don't have time for it anymore at all. I can do Coltrane once in a while if I need a little bit of that. Why would I ever need to go deeper than that? Coltrane squonked all I ever need. And I got plenty of Pharoah Saunders and Archie Shepp and other guys if I need to have a little bit of dissonance in my life. I certainly don't need to expand my dissonant horizons. It's something I listen to maybe 5% of the time nowadays. Excuse me. Some people were smoking out there on the lake or the river, sorry. We got beached up on this island and we were all sitting there intentionally. Everyone was drinking and smoking, and I'm just sitting there with my wife going, "Oh, it stinks, cigarette smokers. Never smoked one in my life. Don't get it." But Aladdin's a tricky label, and it's something that, as I've dove deeper into it, I know there's some important Illinois Jaquette stuff as well on here. And there's a record where I think Illinois and Lester play together. It's a West Coast label, LA area, and it turns out at least 3 subsidiary labels of Aladdin are labels I'm already aware of and collecting. Starting with, most importantly, Jazz West, which was a great little label. And Man, they did some really incredible stuff on that little Jazz West sequence, but it was an Aladdin-owned operation. Intro Records, another label I'm just kind of getting to know, that's got that collections record with Red Norvo and Art Pepper and like is it Shelly Man? It's mostly West. It's all West Coast cats. Charlie Wiggins is on it. Gerald Wiggins. That collection record is nice. It's a nice little set. And then also that Art Pepper record, Intro to Art, I think it's called. That's also on the Intro label. That's also an Aladdin label. And then it turns out Score Records is also an Aladdin label. And Score is a label that I know mostly from having second pressings of things, including some of the Jazz West stuff, which I thought Score maybe just bought the Jazz West. But it turns out they were all just different imprints of the Aladdin label. And I'm not really sure what Aladdin's doing on its own sequence by the time the LP era comes around. It seems like most of the stuff that's labeled as Aladdin is done much earlier. And of course, eventually this stuff is bought by Liberty, bought by United Artists, bought by EMI, and ends up in the Universal camp where Blue Note and Pacific and all that stuff is today as well. But you can see the Liberty labels are on these Japanese pressings. Cool covers. I don't think they're Burt Goldblatt or nothing like that, but they certainly have the influence. I can't read that autograph in that little corner, but the art's cool. I like the colors. I haven't listened to these yet, honestly, but it's fantastic. Lester Young, Jean-Michel recommended it, so you can't really go wrong with anything Jean-Michel's ever suggested or recommended to me. So that was 3 Lester Young pieces I grabbed, and it's not the end of it. I also found some Verve titles by him I didn't have yet, including one I thought I did have. And that's the thing about these Verve empires, it's so big. And a lot of it's issued on Norgran and Clef to get reissued again on Verve. Some of the stuff starts to look the same a little bit. But this is Verve 8181. Lester swings again. And some great players are on this with Oscar Peterson, Ray Brown, Barney Kessel, J.C. Hurd on the drums, Joe Schulman, John Lewis, Bill Clark, Joe Jones, and Gene Ramey. So a fairly fantastic group of musicians. I'd have to guess that's from several different sessions. And does this one give me English? It does give me English on the back. So I can read about that and learn more about it when I get the time. But again, the Japanese, I think I might have bid $5-6 on that and won that. So I'm filling in my Lester Young. I've already got a fairly good Lester Young collection. This is Lester Young in Paris, 83-78. And like I said, I'm just a huge fan of his work. It just shows you how broad the jazz canon is. A lot of people think I have everything, and there's certain labels where I do, but there's just, Verve is so massive. It's a massive enterprise. And the deeper you grasp the Verve canon, the more you recognize that this is probably the most important jazz label between Clef and Norgran and Verve. And Norman Grand's just period. It was just such an important, influential piece. Interestingly, this one has a pretty blank label logo on it. I hope I got the right record there, but it does say MV, which usually is a Verve number. I'm assuming that's right. These guys haven't made a mistake yet, so interesting all the same to see that kind of blank logo. And that was Laughing to Keep From Crying, and he's playing with Roy Eldridge and Harry Edison, Sweet Edison. And you got to recognize that Eldridge, Young, and Edison, that's royalty guys. These aren't just old guys that don't know how to play. These are the masters of the art form. And in retrospect, we look at the Blue Note canon as just this artist of giants, when in reality they were all fairly obscure guys, because all the known real entities were either at Columbia by now or at Verve or Norman Granz and the Jazz at the Philharmonic were doing wonderful things. I'm going to do an episode about the Jazz at the Philharmonic coming up, and I'm probably going to talk more about the John Hammond from spirituals to swing, because this is the genesis process of all this music. This is 8225, a record I've bid on numerous times. Was never able to come up the winner on an American copy of this. And it's not to say that it's not out there. It's just one of those ones that I never chased super hard. Uh, it was always towards the lower end of my priorities when I was bidding on stuff. But it's a great session with a lot of great players on it. It's billed to Dizzy Gillespie essentially, but it's certainly got a lot more folks than that on it, including Stan Getz, Coleman Hawkins, Paul Gonzalez, Wynton Kelly, J.C. Hurd, Wendell Marshall. So it's a pretty outstanding session. And like I said, it's one I've tried to track down numerous times with some of those great players on it. Today's collectors just kind of don't follow these legends. This is another record I got in this buy, which I already showed you when I talked about Signal and Savoy. This was part of that whole episode. This is number, I think it's 1201, if I remember correctly. The first Signal release. Again, it was a nice piece I found. I think I paid maybe $18 for that, which is one of the higher things I paid for. This is a cool record by the female jazz pianist Pat Moran. I learned about Pat Moran collecting Bethlehem. And that's one of the cool things about collecting labels, is you learn about artists that way. And if you respect a label and what they do, the chances of them recording a bunch of shit are pretty limited. Argo didn't make bad records just because you don't know who they are. You know what I mean? This is Audio Fidelity, a label I don't know quite as much about again. Still kind of broadening my scope here on some of these little labels. I have some Lionel Hampton and some Louis Armstrong on Audio Fidelity. I have a Lalo Schifrin and Bossa Trace. I think it's a Brazilian bossa group on Audio Fidelity. But Pat Moran has a couple records on this label, including the one I showed you last episode with the fine singer Bev Kelly. This is on Audio Fidelity, and that's an original American pressing of that. And this is the contemporary partner to that, Pat Moran, without the singer this time, with her trio. And like the Bethlehem stuff she did is fantastic. This record was fantastic. I've not had a chance to listen to this one yet, but she's a nice player, and she's more than just a cocktail pianist. She's a gal with some real guts and some real blues to her, from Oklahoma of all things, which is a strange locale for jazz to be the birthplace of so many great players, which Oklahoma turns out to be. This is a record I got because it was cheap. I think I paid, again, $2 for it. It is one that's kind of eluded me over the years. It's by the great Joe Newman, who plays trumpet with Count Basie for quite a long time. But Newman goes out on his own and makes a string of great records at Storyville and at Roulette, at RCA. Just a real talented trumpet player. He's kind of, again, overlooked. He's got some Sweets Edison in him. He's got some Thad Jones in him. He's a very modern player, in spite of being part of the swing era. And what's important to remember here, I think it's a lot of people forget, if you're part of the swing era by the 50s, even the late 40s, you're surrounded by modernity. And Basie's group's doing small group stuff. Even Goodman would break his band down into little trios and quartets and record and play parts of his shows with these small ensembles, let the rest of the band go backstage and have a bathroom break. So the small group ensembles started to come into preeminence well before the small group era. It was still part of the swing thing. But by the 50s, it was almost all the swing groups had smaller entity versions of themselves, recording groups that were just smaller ensembles, easier to make money with a 4-piece, 5-piece, 6-piece than it was. Of course, Count Basie's famous Kansas City 7, Artie Shaw with his Gramercy 5. I have a cool 10-inch of that coming in the mail right now, which I'm excited about. It was cool hearing some of those groups, like an Artie Shaw, playing in those smaller ensembles, giving everyone a little bit more space. There's less room for the choreography of arrangement and more room for the improvisation of soloists and players, which I think led to the domination of the small groups. It was something that the jazz world, who was left listening and following jazz, just ate up and loved. So this Joe Newman, he has probably 4 records on RCA. And this one I was never able to come across it. And he's tributing here, of course, to Louis Armstrong, Salute the Satch. It's a strange cover, I will say. Uh, he's probably playing a lot of Louis classics like Saints Go Marching In, West End Blues, Jeepers Creepers, Dipper Mouth. So these are all pretty standard. Pennies from Heaven, Basin Street Blues. And so I'm only forward to hearing this because I am a huge Armstrong fan. And if you're not an Armstrong fan, you're not really a jazz fan. You know what I mean? You came here through Asia and Steely Dan and whatever else. But if you don't really like Louis Armstrong, shame on you, to be honest. He's the character, the personality, the improvisation, and all the ideology of jazz. Armstrong embodies it. He's the founding father in so many ways. And you can argue guys like Buddy Bolden came before. But Bolden is a legend that has very little quantification. You know, even Armstrong and King Oliver talked about Buddy Bolden, but there's no documentation of his playing anywhere that anybody knows of. And so we're sure that Bud Bolden was a great player. Armstrong wouldn't have sung his praises otherwise. But it's Armstrong that really codifies things and the development of that personal experience coming through how I play and emote a song to the point where a guy like Armstrong can really change what a song even meant by his simple inflections or twisting of a few words or the aggressiveness with which he played his solo can be the difference between love deferred and love found. So Armstrong's just a real great part of the jazz legacy. So the last thing I found here in Japan in this great little buy I got was some Mode vinyl stuff. And because I have most of the early Mode stuff, there's only about 30 titles. And it's one of those West Coast labels that had a lot of great stuff happening on it. This is the great Victor Feldman on vibes, sorry. And he played both. He was a UK guy, came across, worked with contemporary, worked with Miles Davis for a while. This is going to be probably from 58 or so. And he's playing with Frank Rosolino, Harold Land, Carl Perkins, Earwhite Vinegar, and Stan Levy. So come on now. That's West Coast cool bop royalty. And so I'm excited to listen to this one. Recorded in September of 57 in Hollywood. But I love Carl Perkins, I love Harold Land, I love Rosolino, Vinegar, and Levy. It's pretty much an all-star group. And they went for those covers of those kind of paintings of artists' faces to these more line drawings by the guy by the name of William Box, W.M. Box, it looks like. And all four of these ones I got here have the same artist. That was number 120. This is number 123. There's some pretty obscure stuff on Mode, no question. I've collected the names I know more. But they've even recorded a lot of women, which was pretty unheralded at the time. Jazz Band Ball, the poor people of Beverly Hills, because we're going to have another jazz party here. And this one has Terry Gibbs with Victor Feldman, Lou Levy on the piano, Max Bennett on the bass, Mel Lewis on the drums, and Larry Bunker on the vibes and the xylophone. So they're actually kind of battling, it looks like Feldman and Bunker. So that should be a fun listen as well. Terry, Larry, and Vic. I have to read that. I don't have the time right now. But again, a great little Mode piece. Great West Coast players. These are really thick, heavy covers and jackets. Really happy with what I found here. This is number 127. Sorry, let's do 125 first. This is number 125. Warren Marsh. I thought it was Wayne Marsh for a long time, but it's Warren Marsh with an R. He's a great saxophone player. I made his trading card recently, and he's the family of Hollywood elites. His family, uncle, his cousin, they're all Hollywood actresses, directors, screenwriters. So he comes from a fairly kind of affluent Hollywood family. But Warren kind of chose the path of music, and maybe kind of said, it sounded a bit like this is a rebellious choice for him. I'm going to play that black music, Mom. I like it. And he makes some great stuff at Atlantic. He works with Lee Konitz at times. Warren's a great player. And again, there's a session here with the Ronnie Ball on the piano, another great UK pianist. It was a great record on Sad Boy that's really hard to find. Red Mitchell's on the bass. Stan Levy's on the drums. So it's just a quartet. And quartets leave a lot of room for your lead soloist to perform. So it gives lots of room for Warren Marsh to shine here. Number 125 in the mode sequence. So it's a label I'm getting close to completing again now. And number 127, this is Leonard Feather presents Bop. Another great cover. Again, the OBI strip is kind of obscuring a lot of the art there, sadly. But listen to the lineup on this one. Leonard Feather was a great writer, critic, worked at Period Records for a while, so he helped bring guys like Thad Jones into the limelight somewhat, even though Thad was already a star with Basie. But he was kind of unheralded star with Basie, honestly. Leonard Feather presents Bop, featuring George Wallington, the great Sicilian-born, New York-raised pianist. Idris Suleiman's on the trumpet. Thad Jones is also on the trumpet on side 2. Phil Woods is on the alto, the great Boston alto saxophonist. Curly Russell's on the bass, who's a New York native and a great player. Plays with Blakey back at the Birdland sessions. Denzel Best, who kind of shows up more on the West Coast as a drummer. And then Art Taylor's on the drums on some of this as well. So it's a pretty darn modern group filled with kind of the all-stars of both coasts in a way. So you can see Mode, even up to the end there, was doing some pretty serious stuff. So that wraps up today's episode. My third haul from Face Records in Japan. Again, apologies to Lou Donaldson. Hope you all enjoyed that episode. If you want to support the channel, please go to my Patreon and pledge a few dollars a month. It's always appreciated. It helps to grow the success and the time I can put into this channel. It helps justify it to my wife, the time and effort I put in. Needless to say, the first 3 years of this channel, I've worked a lot harder on this than the money I've received in return. And my wife sees that. She knows I'm planting a tree. And trees take a while to grow to give you shade. And so she knows I'm putting the work in. But it's always nice when that Patreon gets a few new donations and pledges, because it shows my wife that we're still growing this thing. And we're always going to be a bit of a niche thing. We're talking classic jazz, but we have over 100,000 hours of watch time now, over 500,000 views, over 4,000 subscribers. So there is an audience for what we're talking about. So you guys are the best. Appreciate you all. You all stay safe. Enjoy your summer. Happy Memorial Day weekend. Hope you all enjoyed it. Hopefully I'll get this episode up either today or tomorrow morning. Y'all have a great day. Peace.